Horizon Special Mini Episode 811. The Quiet Hangars. Narrator Milo Ortega. There are many things I learned during my years in the outer defensive front. How to keep someone alive when the nearest medical facility is 3 hours away. How to identify an engine explosion by sound. How to sleep through artillery. How to prepare coffee in conditions where the concept of clean water has become theoretical. And most importantly, I learned that when a senior officer tells you everything is under control, you should immediately determine what they forgot to mention. Unfortunately, nobody had forgotten to mention anything this time. The problem was that everyone had left. I watched the Horizon disappear into FTL. A few seconds later, the Vigil followed. The last traces of the two ships vanished from the Caledonia sensors. I remained inside the Guardian hangar. Alone? Well, almost alone. There was the Caledonia. Technically, that counted as company. She was old, temperamental, and made noises that no engineer had ever successfully explained. But she didn't talk. Usually, I looked at the enormous hangar around me. It was almost completely dark. The Guardian structure had survived 40,000 years, and somehow the lights still worked. Most of them, anyway. A few sections remained illuminated by a faint amber glow. The rest disappeared into darkness. One of the Guardian ships is still parked on the opposite side of the hangar. The Caledonia sat near the entrance. And beyond those walls was an entire asteroid belt containing several Devourer vessels that had, fortunately, decided to leave. I checked the sensors again. Nothing. No Devourers. No Horizons. No Vigil. No incoming messages. I leaned back in the captain's chair. Well, I looked around. Looks like we're waiting. The problem with waiting was that nobody had told me how long. It could be 3 days. It could be 3 weeks. The Guardian facility was safe. The Caledonia had enough supplies. We had power. We had food. We had air. And I had scotch. Technically, that meant the situation was under control. I decided to make dinner. There was no point sitting around staring at empty sensor displays. I went to the galleys. The Caledonia's kitchen was small, but I'd spent enough years in it to know every piece of equipment by sound. The refrigeration unit had a slight vibration. The ventilation fan clicked every 11 seconds. The heating element in the main cooker made a noise like an irritated insect. Normal. Comforting. I started preparing dinner. 5 minutes later, something made a loud metallic sound somewhere outside. Clang. I stopped. I listened. Nothing. I waited. Still nothing. I returned to cooking. Another sound. Clang. I looked toward the hatch. Old metals. I continued cutting vegetables. Another sound. This one came from farther away. A long metallic groans. I stopped again. Very old metals. I put the knife down. The ship's sensors showed nothing. No movement. No pressure change. No thermal signature. Nothing. I picked up the knife again. Probably thermal expansion. I continued cooking. A light came on in the hangars. I looked through the galley window. One of the distant Guardian corridors had suddenly illuminated. I stared at it. The corridor had been dark when I last checked. I looked at the sensor display. Nothing. Automatic lightings. I nodded. Reasonable. I went back to dinners. 10 minutes later, another corridor illuminated. Then another's. Then another's. One after the others. A line of amber lights extending into the darkness. I stopped cooking. I stared at them. Very enthusiastic automatic lighting. I decided dinner could wait. I grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the hatch. The Caledonia remained behind me. The hangar was enormous. From the floor, the ceiling was barely visible. I walked toward the illuminated corridor. My footsteps echoed. That was the first thing I didn't like. The second was that my footsteps didn't sound like mine. They sounded like someone else walking behind me. I stopped. The footsteps continued for 1 second. Then stopped. I turned around. Nothing. Just the Caledonia. The Guardian vessel. Darkness. I stood there for several seconds. Then I sighed. All right. I continued walking. The corridor led to a small maintenance chamber. There was nothing particularly interesting inside. Old tools, storage containers, a workbench, some sort of automated repair unit. The Guardian technology was impressive, but I wasn't an archaeologist. I was a cook. I knew the difference between a torque regulator and a kitchen appliance, only because one of them could potentially make coffee. I found an old machine with a container on top. It looked suspiciously like a food dispenser. I examined the controls. One button remained illuminated. I pressed it. The machine hummed. Something emerged from a small opening. A perfectly rectangular block of pale material. I picked it up. It smelled like compressed grass. I took a cautious bite. I immediately regretted it. I looked at the machine. You had 40,000 years. I put the block down. You could have improved this. The machine continued humming. I walked away. A few minutes later, I found something more interesting. An old Guardian recreational area. There were several seats, a table, a wall display, and what appeared to be a game. I activated it. The screen displayed several geometric shapes. I touched one. The shapes rearranged themselves. I touched another. The system produced a pleasant tone. I smiled. Finally, I played for several minutes. Then the screen displayed a message. I couldn't read the language, but the interface was clearly congratulating me. Thank you. I stood. Nice to know someone appreciates competence. A light behind me turned on. I turned. Nothing. Another light. Then another. I stared at the corridor. All right. I picked up the flashlight. Let's establish one thing. I pointed it down the corridors. If you're going to haunt the place, you need to be more convincing. Silence. I waited. Nothing. I nodded. Good. I returned to the Caledonia. Dinner had become cold. I reheated it. Then something moved across the hangar. I saw it through the forward window. A large shadow. It passed behind the Guardian vessel. I froze. I stared. The shadow moved again. Slowly, I reached for the communication panel. There was nobody to call. That was inconvenient. I looked at the sensor display. Nothing. I checked the thermal scanner. Nothing. Motion sensors. Nothing. I picked up a heavy maintenance tool. It wasn't technically a weapon. But at that moment, I wasn't particularly interested in technical definitions. I stepped into the hangar. The shadow moved again. I followed it. Around the Guardian vessel. Nothing. I looked upward. Nothing. Then I noticed a mechanism above the hangar. A large maintenance arm was slowly moving along a rail. It had probably been there for thousands of years. Some automated maintenance system had finally decided that this was an appropriate moment to become operational. I stared at it, then at the tool in my hand, then back at the machine. Right. I lowered the tool. I knew that. The maintenance arm moved again. I walked away. Obviously. Back aboard the Caledonia, I opened a bottle of scotch. Not because I was frightened. Because it had been a long day. There is an important distinction. I poured a glass. Checked the sensors. Nothing. Took a sip. Nothing. Checked the sensors again. Nothing. I began preparing coffee. That was when I heard footsteps. Not metallic noises. Not machinery. Footsteps. Slow. Distinct. Coming from the corridor outside the galley. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. I took the flashlight. Opened the doors. The corridor was empty. I stepped outside. Nothing. I walked 10 meters. Nothing. 20. Nothing. Then I heard another sound. Behind me. I turned. Nothing. I returned to the Caledonia. I closed the hatch. Locked it. Then remembered that the hatch was not actually designed to keep anything out. I unlocked it again. That was pointless. I sat down. The sensors remained quiet. I looked at the empty hangars. Maybe I'm tired. I checked the time. It was 3 in the morning. Definitely tired. I went to sleep. Or tried to. At approximately 3:15, something knocked on the hull. Tap. I opened my eyes. Silence. Tap. I sat up. I stared at the ceiling. Tap. Absolutely not. I got out of bed. The sound came again. I followed it. It was coming from the storage compartment. I opened the doors. Nothing. I checked the shelves. Nothing. Then I noticed one of the old Guardian containers had fallen over. I picked it up. There was a small maintenance drone underneath. It had apparently activated itself. The drone looked at me. I looked at it. It made a soft electronic sound. You're not helping. It moved away. I closed the compartment. I went back to bed. At some point, I fell asleep. When I woke up, the hangar was quiet. Properly quiet. Morning. I made coffee. Real coffee. The Guardians could keep their nutritional blocks. I checked the sensors. Still nothing. I began preparing breakfast. And then I noticed something. The chair in the captain's station was occupied. I stopped. I stared. There was something orange sitting on it. I walked closer. The orange thing moved. It was a cat. I didn't move. The cat looked at me. I looked at the cat. Neither of us spoke. I was fairly certain the cat had the advantage in this conversation. I took another step. How? The cat blinked. I looked behind it. The bridge was empty. The doors were closed. The hangar was sealed. Caledonia was inside this completely sealed facility. And this particular cat had disappeared weeks ago through an ancient transit structure. It was not supposed to be here. It was not supposed to be anywhere. I stared at it. The cat yawned. Then it jumped down from the chair. It walked past me, completely uninterested. I turned around. It walked into the corridors. I followed. The cat entered the galley, stopped, looked at the kitchen, then walked back toward the bridge. I followed it again. Wait, the cat ignored me. How did you get here? Nothing. Did you come through the portal? The cat continued walking. That's not a rhetorical question. Still nothing. It returned to the bridge, jumped onto the captain's chair, turned around 3 times, lay down. I stood there for several seconds. Then I remembered something. Professor Kale Varus. During the investigation of the previous portal, Kale had used a particular name for the animal. Not cat, not felines. Observer. I looked at the animals. Observer. One ear moved. I smiled. That's you, isn't it? The cat opened one eye. I waited. The cat closed it. Good conversation. I sat in the chair opposite it. The cat ignored me. I looked at the sensors. Nothing. I looked at the cats. Still nothing. I poured another coffee. You're going to be a problem. The cat remained completely motionless. I sighed. Fine. I stood and returned to the kitchen. Breakfast wasn't going to cook itself. Although, given the technology we just discovered, I wasn't entirely certain anymore. A few hours later, I opened a communications channel. The signal to the outside network was weak but functional. I recorded a message. Captain McRae, this is Milo. I paused. Caledonia is secure. Systems are stable. The system remains quiet. No immediate devourer activities. I looked through the bridge window. The Guardian hangar was still empty. Mostly. I continued. We're going to be here for a while, so everything is under control. I paused again. The cat was still sleeping in Angus' chair. I looked at it, then back at the recorders. And I stopped. I wasn't sure how to phrase this. I tried again. And you'll probably want to know. I pointed toward the chair. Who I found. The cat opened one eye. It looked at me, then closed it again. I sent the message. The transmission disappeared into the darkness. I remained standing there. The cat remained asleep. The hangar remained silent. For the first time since the horizon had left, I felt completely comfortable. Not because I understood what was happening. I didn't. Not because the Guardian facility was no longer strange. It was. And not because I was certain the cat had any idea how it had arrived. I was certain of exactly one thing. Whatever else was going on in that hangar, I wasn't alone anymore. I looked at the cats. Just so we're clear. The cat didn't move. I am still the cook. One eye opened, then closed again. Good. I returned to the kitchen. There was bread to bake, coffee to make, and apparently, after several weeks of being missing from the galaxy, a cat to feed. I had survived combat zones. I had survived emergency landings. I had survived Angus McRae's cooking decisions. I suspected I could survive this. Probably. End of special episode, The Quiet Hangar.